If you want to know, I'll tell you all about it if you go there. But here's the point. I could probably go around this room right now and say, oh, let me tell you about another good restaurant that has good cheeseburgers. Let me tell you about another good restaurant that has good shrimp. Or let me tell you about this place in Danville. Or let me tell you about this place in Lexington. Don't we do that all the time? Telling people about great places, especially on places to eat. Maybe I just listen to that one more closer, but it seems like we'll talk about places to eat. And we'll go and we'll talk about other things like that. Maybe we found this great place that we go on vacation. And what do we tell people? Oh, you got to go there. They got a swimming pool set up there, perfect for kids. And you can walk to places to go shopping. You can go here. Don't we do that all the time? Why? We had a good experience. And we want other people to have that experience. You probably know about right now where I'm headed. Because we do that all the time with different things. But when you say sometimes, we don't do it with the gospel. And it seems so crazy. Even when I was sitting there thinking about that this week, I thought, boy, I'll do that all the time, just like explain to you. And when we tell somebody about a restaurant, what do? We'll be like, oh, wait a minute. If you go there, you need to sit here. And on the menu, you need that particular item. We'll go to the nth degree of detail, but yet when we talk about the gospel, for whatever reason, we start retreating. And hey, I'm guilty too. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And why do we do that? Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit today. But I want you to think, I can remember when I was about 16, I've told you my story. I was saved when I was 22, but I was super active in church, and I'd go out with youth groups and do things, and we were sent to go and go out through this group and tell people about Jesus. And, of course, when we all sat in the room, we were like, yeah, and then when we got out there, I was scared of today's text. He goes, I'm not ashamed. And maybe somebody goes, Paul, man, you've been through a bunch. Y'all remember the stories when we were in Acts? He's in Lystra. Somebody says, we don't like Paul for his message of the gospel. Stone him, leave him for dead. You remember in Philippi? You remember that's when he's with Silas and they sing that night in the middle of the night in jail. But what had happened right before that? They were beaten, thrown in jail, put in stocks. He goes, oh yeah, that's no problem. I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Y'all remember in Acts chapter 9, it said that there were people standing at the gate of the city, said, we want to kill him. So we're on the lookout for him. And he had so much opposition that his followers and friends helped lower him through the wall, remember that, in a basket at nighttime. And you could keep going on with stories about Paul. I mean, over in the Corinthian letters, it says, oh, he's been beat a whole bunch of times, thrown in jail a whole bunch of times. Now, maybe the people are going, Paul, maybe it's time for you to be quiet. Maybe you shouldn't be so rowdy with the gospel. And Paul says, I'm not ashamed. That word ashamed there, he goes, I'm not on the retreat in any way. He goes, I'm not disillusioned in any way. I'm not embarrassed in any way. I'm not sitting here saying that if I say it, I'm worried that somebody's going to. See, what do we think? Are we worried about being stoned? No, we're not going to be stoned. Are we worried about being thrown in jail? No, not yet, anyway. What are we more worried about? What would you say? We're probably worried about things like somebody's going to probably think I'm weird. They're going to kind of look sideways at me and think I'm kind of goofy. They're going to think, man, that seems kind of weird that you're that crazy about Jesus. You see, what I want you to hear today is we just start diving into this. When it really gets down to it, we stop sharing the gospel because we're worried about what people think about us. Now, I can say that because I'm guilty. I've been in those situations where I'm embarrassed to say it, where you start thinking about, for some unknown reason, you try to talk yourself out of sharing the gospel with somebody. But we do. Fear of people. But there's another reason. Don't you think the other reason is we're afraid that we're going to make a big mistake? I'm going to share the gospel. That's why I put fear of failure there. You're going, oh, but if I say something, I'm going to mess the whole thing up. Well, let me just let you in on a secret. It's not all about us at all. It's all about God. And He tells us to be obedient But he doesn't tell us we have to be perfect in our speech. He doesn't tell us that we have to be perfect with every word. He just tells us to obey him. In fact, you're going to see it as we go through Romans. He says, hey, how do people know about the gospel? You got to tell them. He says, you have to tell them. That's in Romans 10. We're a long ways from getting there right now. But he tells us that. There's other reasons. Some people go, I'm fearful if somebody's going to bring up my past. Some of y'all are here on Wednesday nights and we're walking through the book of John. Do y'all remember the woman at the well, the Samaritan woman? The lady that had a whole bunch of husbands and now she was living with another man, and all of a sudden Jesus speaks to her and he interacts with her and she gets saved. Did that bother Jesus? No. Did she stay quiet? No. She went back to her city to tell people about Jesus, regardless of her past. That shouldn't be a problem either. We should be people that what he's saying in this very first statement, he goes, I'm not ashamed. He goes, I am not ashamed. He said, we're to be bold and confident. Now, that's your intro. But now I want to ask you, so why or how in the world could I be bold? Well, I believe one of the secrets is we need to sometimes remember how great and awesome and spectacular. I'm getting some feedback. I notice when I leave this podium, I'm getting it. So maybe I'm supposed to stand right here, you know. They got me boxed in. But anyway, the thing there is this. We need to understand with great clarity how great the gospel is. And I want you to see that in this text and look at some truths that we need to see about the gospel. Now, I'm going to read again because I want you to see. Paul starts talking and he goes, or writing, he goes, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. But look at his very next phrase. He says, and I'm going to put it in my words, I'm not ashamed of something that is absolutely 100% reliable, dependable. It is unbelievable. It has the absolute power of God. Now, I don't know what you might have. If you got a study Bible, you might have a footnote there. That word power is the word where we get our word dynamite. Now, you know, you go through Kentucky. You ever gone through on some of these highways and you see like rock walls on either side of it? Just big, tall rock wall. How did all that rock move? One of the ways? Dynamite. It makes the immovable movable. You know, that's what the gospel does. It makes a way that seems impossible. That's what the gospel does. That's what he's saying here. He goes, it is absolute power. I mean, those of you that have handled dynamite or something that powerful, if we go out here and we threw about 3 sticks of dynamite, would there be a big hole in the ground? Absolutely. Would people run for cover? Yeah, they would. They'd think, what's going on at that church? But it's power. And Paul says, I hold power in my heart and in my speech with the gospel of Jesus Christ. It changes lives. Now, I want you to think about that power for just a minute. What was Peter before he met Jesus? An uneducated fisherman. What happened to Peter? He goes from a fisherman to a preacher of the gospel, preaching to 3,000 people in Acts chapter 2. What about Paul? Paul's on the road, the road to Damascus, and he's going there to arrest people against God, totally 100% against God. He gets saved by God's grace. He gets changed from a persecutor of Christianity to the writer of a whole bunch of our New Testament and a missionary all over the Mediterranean basin. That's power. You could keep going. The woman I just mentioned at the well, she had all of those things happen in her life. She goes to be a proclaimer. I mentioned the Philippian church. What about that jailer? Earlier that very evening, he had said, let's go beat Paul. Remember? And before daybreak, he has Paul over at his house because he's been saved by the power of the gospel. Now, that's power. And you could go through this room right now. Think about your own life. The gospel of Jesus Christ changed the direction of your life. Every person in here. If God hasn't changed your direction, then you need to say, time out, because the gospel changes. That's what he's saying in this letter. He goes, hey, I'm not ashamed of something that just changes people's life. They go from hell to heaven. He goes, oh man, it's power. But notice the next word. he says there's power, but he says for what? And I just referenced it, but he said it's because in verse 16 he goes, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. There's people out there condemned and dying and going to hell every day. And I need to go tell them about the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes. Amen? That's what he's reminding us. So it's a pretty simple question, I guess you would say. What in the world should be our response? Now, you could probably write some of these. I want us to just stop and think, how would I respond? Well, first thing I want you to hear is we were talking about Paul starting this text, and he goes, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. We can flip that, and he goes, go be bold. Be unafraid. Because whatever you want to say to somebody about Jesus and his salvation, it never fails. Jesus will never let you down. Jesus is absolutely true. Tell people about the saving message of the gospel. But secondly, it tells us this. Remember, sometimes we think, oh, that person is beyond salvation. Not a chance. Go look at the woman at the well. Go look at the Philippian jailer. Go look at Paul on the road to Damascus. Go look at those examples we talked in today's message. Oh, there's one thing that his grace does not cover. A person saying, I reject Jesus Christ. Which, oh, by the way, we're doing already if we're not saved. But no sin, no hardness of heart, no self-righteousness. Not one bit of that is ever going to save a person. The power of the gospel is trusting in Jesus Christ and him alone. I just want to challenge you today as you leave here. I made a note to myself. I want you to think about it. Is there someone on your heart right now you need to go share the gospel with? I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to make it a prayer. You know that Paul writes in Scripture, he goes, would you pray for